Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive, where we're going to unpack some really powerful ideas about mental strength.
Yeah.
We're taking an excerpt from a really insightful audiobook
Uh-huh.
and exploring how to overcome those two big things that hold us back. Fear of taking risks
Mm.
and that tendency to dwell on the past.
Yeah.
I think you're going to find some really useful nuggets of wisdom in here.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how often we get in our own way.
This audiobook really shines a light on those mental patterns that keep us stuck.
So it starts off with this story about Dale, a shop teacher.
Mm.
He has this big dream of opening a furniture store,
Mm-hmm.
but he's been putting it off for years, almost 30 years. He's just terrified of the financial risk.
That's something so many of us can relate to, that
Yeah.
feeling of being stuck because we're afraid to take a leap. Dale's past experience with a bad real estate investment is really coloring his perception of the risk.
It's like he's letting that one bad experience define his entire approach to risk.
Exactly. The audiobook highlights how our feelings about risk are often driven by emotion, not a clear-headed assessment of the actual probability of success or failure.
It uses the example of flying versus driving.
Mm-hmm.
Statistically, flying is much safer, but many people are more afraid of flying because it feels less within their control.
Right, that's a classic example of how our fear meter, our gut feeling about danger,
Hmm.
isn't always reliable.
So that's why it's so important to understand the concept of calculated risk.
Calculated risk.
Yeah, can you break that down for us?
It's a way of making decisions that involves looking at both the potential upsides and the potential downsides.
Okay.
It's about asking yourself, what could I gain if this works out?
Mhm.
And what could I lose if it doesn't?
Hmm.
What are the chances of each of those things happening?
So instead of just reacting out of fear,
Mm,
we're actually taking the time to think it through.
exactly. And that's where the audiobook gets really practical. It walks you through a series of questions to help you assess any risks you're considering, like,
Uh-oh.
how badly do I want this? How does this decision align with my goals? What are the best and worst case scenarios? And what can I do to minimize the chances of a negative outcome?
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
If we avoid thinking about risk altogether,
Right.
we might actually be missing out on amazing opportunities. Like in the case of Omar Aman,
Yeah.
the engineer who decided to become an architect at 60.
Aman's story is such a great reminder that it's never too late to go after what you truly want. It really begs the question, what dreams are you putting on hold? Because fear is calling the shots.
And it's not always these big life-changing decisions, right? Sometimes it's the smaller everyday choices where we let fear hold us back.
Mhm.
The audiobook tells this funny story about Jet, a dog who's terrified of certain types of flooring. He
Yeah.
needs little rugs to walk on certain surfaces.
Jet with his little rug pathways is a great illustration of how even seemingly irrational fears can shape our behavior.
It reminds me of.
It's
It's a reminder that sometimes the things we're afraid of are actually harmless.
It reminds me of how people can get obsessive about germs. Over-sanitizing everything can actually backfire and weaken the immune system.
Totally.
Sometimes our attempts to avoid risk can actually make us more vulnerable.
I had a similar experience with stage fright. I was terrified to give my graduation speech, totally convinced I was going to freeze up or completely bomb it.
A lot of people can relate to that. Public speaking is a common fear.
Yeah.
What did you do to overcome it?
Well, what really scared me wasn't the speech itself, but the possibility of awkward silence afterward. Like, what if nobody clapped?
That's an interesting insight. So you weren't afraid of failing, you were afraid of the reaction.
Yeah, so my friends and I came up with this plan. They were going to be my clap ninjas. No matter what happened, they'd go wild with the applause.
That's brilliant. You identified the root of your fear and found a way to mitigate that specific risk.
And it totally worked. It took so much pressure off.
It highlights how getting specific about what we're actually afraid of can be incredibly empowering.
The audiobook talks about how practice makes perfect when it comes to overcoming any fear, even really challenging ones. It tells the story of a psychologist, Albert Ellis, who was terrified of rejection.
Oh, yes. Ellis's experiment is a classic example of facing your fears head on. He challenged himself to talk to 130 women in a month, asking them all out on dates, just to get comfortable with the possibility of being rejected.
Wow, that takes guts. Did it work?
He didn't necessarily get 130 dates, but he did learn to tolerate rejection, and that's a powerful reminder that even the most intense fears can be overcome. With consistent effort, we can literally train ourselves to be more comfortable with risk.
That's encouraging, because the audiobook wraps up this whole risk-taking section with the example of Richard Branson, who seems to thrive on risk.
Branson's success really underscores the link between calculated risk-taking and innovation. He's constantly pushing boundaries and making bold bets. He actually said,
It's inspiring to see how someone like Branson embraces risk. It makes you think about all the possibilities that open up when we're willing to step outside of our comfort zones.
absolutely. And that brings us to the second big idea from the audiobook, the challenge of letting go of the past.
Okay, so the audiobook introduces us to Gloria. She's carrying a lot of guilt over her parenting decisions. Her adult daughter keeps moving back home, unemployed, and not really taking responsibility for her life.
Gloria's story is a perfect example of how dwelling on past mistakes can sometimes lead to unhealthy patterns in our present relationships. Instead of addressing the current situation with her daughter, she's stuck in a cycle of guilt and self-blame.
So how do we know if we're dwelling too much on the past? Are there any telltale signs?
The audiobook lists several common signs of dwelling. Do you find yourself constantly replaying past events in your mind? Are you struggling to let go of regret or resentment? Do you tend to beat yourself up for things you wish you'd done differently?
Those are all pretty common experiences, I think. It's natural to reflect on the past, but when does it become a problem?
It becomes a problem when it starts to interfere with your ability to live fully in the present. When those thoughts and feelings from the past are taking up so much mental space that you're not able to focus on what's happening right now.
You know, when my mom passed away, and then a few years later, my partner Lincoln too, I really struggled with that. I felt this overwhelming urge to freeze everything in time.
What do you mean by freeze everything?
I wanted to keep all of their belongings exactly as they had left them. I even kept Lincoln's toothbrush for 2 years. It felt wrong to change anything.
That's a very human response to loss. Holding on to those physical objects can feel like a way of holding on to the person, the memories.
It's like I was creating a museum of their lives because I wasn't ready to let go.
Sometimes dwelling on the past can be a way of coping with grief and loss. It can feel safer to stay in that familiar space of the past, even if it's painful, than to move into the uncertainty of the present.
But the audiobook is clear that dwelling on the past, whether it's about loss or regret or anything else, doesn't actually change anything. It just robs us of the present moment and the possibility of a better future.
It's like that saying, you can't drive forward while looking in the rearview mirror. You might be able to see where you've been, but you're bound to crash if that's all you're focused on.
So how do we break free from that cycle of dwelling? How do we shift our focus to the present and the future?
The audiobook offers several practical strategies for managing those thoughts and feelings about the past. One approach is to actually schedule a specific time each day to process those thoughts and emotions. Instead of letting them intrude on your entire day, you're creating a container for them.
That's an interesting idea, creating boundaries for your thoughts.
Another strategy is to redirect your attention to something more positive. When you find yourself dwelling, consciously shift your focus to something that brings you joy or a sense of peace. It could be spending time with loved ones, engaging in a favorite hobby, or simply appreciating the beauty around you.
So it's about actively choosing where to direct our attention.
Exactly. The audiobook also emphasizes the importance of setting goals for the future. Having something to look forward to, something to strive for, can help pull us out of that dwelling mindset.
It's like creating a sense of purpose and direction, even if it's just small steps. What are some other strategies?
Another powerful technique is to focus on the lessons learned from past experiences, rather than just the mistakes themselves. Instead of asking, why did I do that? Ask yourself, what did I learn from that experience that can help me make better choices in the future?
That's a great reframe. It's about extracting the wisdom from our experiences, even the difficult ones.
The audiobook also talks about the importance of forgiveness, both for ourselves and others. Holding on to anger and resentment only keeps us trapped in the past.
Forgiveness can be such a challenging concept, though.
It is, but it's incredibly liberating. It doesn't mean condoning what happened, but it does mean releasing yourself from the burden of carrying all that negativity.
The audiobook shares this incredible story about Winona Ward, a domestic violence survivor, who went on to become a lawyer and an advocate for other victims.
Ward's story is such a powerful example of how we can choose to let our past shape us, rather than define us. She could have easily been consumed by bitterness and anger, but she channeled her experiences into a force for good.
It's amazing how she transformed her pain into a purpose.
It highlights the idea that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means accepting what happened, learning from it, and choosing to create a different future for ourselves.
That's a really inspiring message.
And it connects back to the concept of risk-taking. Sometimes moving on from the past requires us to take a risk, to step into the unknown.
To let go of what's familiar, even if it's painful, and embrace the possibility of something better.
Exactly. It's about having the courage to choose hope over despair, growth over stagnation.
That's a powerful thought to leave our listeners with. It's so easy to feel like we're at the mercy of our past. But Winona Ward's story is a powerful reminder that we always have a choice. We can choose to let our past define us,
Right.
or we can choose to learn from it
Right.
and create a new path forward.
It's really about shifting our perspective. Can we see our past, not as a source of shame or regret, but as a source of wisdom and resilience? Can we find the growth in those experiences?
This whole deep dive has really been about reclaiming that power, hasn't it? We explored how to face our fears, how to take calculated risks, and how to break free from those thought patterns that keep us stuck in the past.
And one thing that struck me as we were talking about these ideas is that the audiobook doesn't really delve into the importance of support systems.
You're right. It focuses a lot on individual effort, on those internal shifts we need to make.
Yeah.
But we all know how much easier it is to navigate challenges when we have people in our corner.
Absolutely. Think about Gloria and her daughter. What if Gloria had a trusted friend or therapist she could talk to, someone to offer a different perspective on that situation?
That kind of support could have made a world of difference. And it's true for all of us, whether we're battling fear, trying to let go of the past, or just facing a difficult decision.
Yeah.
We don't have to go it alone.
Reaching out to someone you trust, a friend, family member, therapist, mentor, can be so empowering. Sometimes just having that external support can give us the courage to take a risk or to try a new approach.
It's like having a sounding board, someone to help us process our thoughts and feelings, and
Yeah.
to see things from a different angle.
Exactly. And they can remind us of our strengths and encourage us to keep moving forward, even when it feels difficult.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
we want to leave you with this thought. What resonated with you today? What story or insight really stuck with you?
And how can you apply those insights to your own life? What action can you take today, even a small step, to move towards the future you want to create?
Remember, knowledge is only powerful when we put it into practice. So take those nuggets of wisdom, those practical strategies, and start experimenting. What have you got to lose?
Except maybe some of that fear and regret that's been holding you back.
That's a wrap on this deep dive. We hope you learned something, laughed a little, and most importantly, feel empowered to conquer your fears and create a life that's truly aligned with your values and your dreams. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep learning.